We now have the pleasure of being joined by Brendan Marks. He is the Duke UNC beat reporter for The Athletic. Brendan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
So Duke, the last time we saw them, they demolished Syracuse 79-59, and the score probably makes the game look even closer than it was. But since then, in about the last month, what's been up with the Blue Devils? How has the season been going for them?
Yeah, it's been an interesting season, and that Syracuse game was honestly probably one of the highlights. That was one of the games where they played as well as they have probably all year, at least in terms of sharing the ball. I think they might have had 25 assists that game. I mean, they were all over the place in terms of passing and finding each other. So, but it's been an interesting month. Obviously in that time, Duke has dealt with an injury to Trevor Keels. AJ Griffin has continued to emerge for them. Jeremy Roach has been in and out of the starting lineup trying to figure out his role. So there have been some shifting parts, and probably more so than Coach K would like to have this late in February, but it is what it is. And especially after the way that Duke played against Virginia this week and being able to come away with that win, close one, tough environment against a very, very good and improving Virginia team. I think the signs are still pointing up for Duke right now.
So you mentioned Virginia. That's one of the teams that actually beat Duke a couple of weeks ago. I think that was after that Syracuse game on a big Monday at Cameron. And you mentioned things have been picking up. So why have things gotten better for Duke, despite the inconsistencies with who's in and who's out?
Yeah, I think one of the big reasons has been the emergence of AJ Griffin. And so this is a guy, you guys obviously know his brother well. And AJ is probably more physically just imposing than his brother was. He's about 6'6", 6'7". He's got a 7-foot wingspan. He's 225. Looks like he's cut out of marble. Like he is Jimmy Butler Jr. with a jump shot. He's one of the best 3-point shooters in the league and really one of the best 3-point shooters in the country. And he had so many injuries in high school and another injury in October of this year that sort of hindered him from being as effective as he possibly could have been at the start of the year. The past month or so, he has just been on fire. I mean, been absolutely on fire. He had 22 points, made 5 threes against Louisville, obviously scored 10 of his 13 points the last 4 minutes against Virginia to help Duke pull out that win. So his emergence has taken Duke to a whole nother level. And if Duke is going to be a team that makes a Final Four run, makes a national championship run, it'll be because he has turned into this sort of secondary offensive option for them behind Paolo Banchero.
After Duke lost that Virginia game, they go on, this mini run that ends with a Virginia win. In the middle there, they had a tight game with Wake Forest that obviously the headline coming from it was Coach K had to leave the game at halftime. For the Syracuse fans who haven't been able to follow closely, what was kind of the aftermath of that whole situation, and has it affected the team at all?
Yeah, so Coach K before that Wake Forest game, just for context, he looked a little funny, even during warmups, like had his head bowed, eyes closed, hand over the face, that sort of deal. And, throughout the course of the first half of that game, you kept looking over at the bench and he's, doing the same thing, sitting back, hand over his face. And at halftime, when he goes back to walk to the locker room, it was real slow, real deliberate. And he didn't come out after the half and ends up not finishing the game, obviously. And it turns out he ended up receiving IV fluids in the locker room, was dizzy. And basically what he has chalked it up to since is exhaustion, fatigue, dehydration. They, like you mentioned, is a very physical game against Wake Forest. It was intense, but that was a stretch where Duke had, I think they had 4 games in 8 days. So it was a lot for him. And, this is a guy who doesn't get a lot of sleep. He's very, notorious for his preparation. And there haven't really been any longer term effects, I would say, on the team, but more so it's just if anything, it was a sign of his mortality. Not like his physical mortality, but like of the semblance that, okay, like the end is coming. Like this is a 75-year-old man who's coaching his last season. And I think if anything, that was his third to last game at Cameron. At that point, you're looking and you're thinking, okay, wow, there's really only 2 more times this guy's going to be in this building. That I think may have created more of a sense of urgency for the team. But in terms of his long-term health, he's okay, thankfully. No lingering impacts that have sort of affected his way that he's been about the past 2 weeks since.
Well, that's great to hear. And obviously that's the main focus. Just on the basketball side, though, you get a second half where, the mortality coming, John Shire gets to take control of the team. What did you think of those 20 minutes?
Yeah, it was interesting. Duke looked fantastic in the first 5 or 10, and pretty bad in the last 10 or so. Built a 19-point lead and watched it all disappear. So, but I think, Jon Scheyer is very different from Coach K on the bench. So that was his third game that he has had experience filling in for K. Last year, there was a game where K was a close COVID contact against Florida State. Scheyer ended up filling in, or Boston College, excuse me. Then this year, the first Wake Forest game, K didn't travel, had a non-COVID virus, didn't make the trip at all, and Duke, won that game in easy fashion. And then obviously this instance. So we've seen glimpses of Scheyer before, but in the middle, this was the first one at Cameron with full fans. And he just looks so calm. He was so composed. He's not like K, who's barking at the officials every single call. He's not up and walking around. He was very muted, but you could tell in the huddles, he's really drawing plays up in the clipboard, and they won the game. That's the most important thing. They won the game. So he's now 3-0 in his, temporary time filling in for K. That's the only thing that Duke fans care about. And I'd be very interested to see if that demeanor sort of lasts over a longer period of time, or how he'll sort of handle himself over a full season, but certainly an impressive 3 games.
So moving to the K and Boeheim relationship, since Syracuse moved into the ACC, Duke games feel like everything to Syracuse fans. And it hasn't even been 10 years yet where it feels like now everyone thinks, Duke is Syracuse's biggest rival, but that's not the same on the other end. Syracuse is not Duke's biggest rival. So do people down in Durham value the K and Boeheim, rivalry or relationship as much as people in Syracuse?
People definitely value it. I mean, I think, of all the coaches in the league at this point, Kay's probably as close to Boeheim as anyone. I mean, he's closer than he is with, maybe with Roy Williams before he retired. But I mean, even then, I would say that his relationship, and also his wife Mickey's relationship with Julie Boeheim, that's rock solid. That's ironclad. And, the games always deliver for the most part. I mean, obviously Duke has been on more of an upward trajectory, and I don't know that you could say the same about Syracuse right now. But in terms of like competitiveness, intensity, like they're awesome. And, you think about, I'm working on a story right now, and I got to talk to Coach Boeheim for it actually about their time at the Olympics and their time with USA Basketball together. And it's just fascinating to hear like what their dynamic was like in terms of, obviously Kay's the head coach and Boeheim is not used to not just sort of saying how things are going to go. But their camaraderie and teamwork in that was seamless. There was one play where, in the Rio Olympics, for example, that Coach Boeheim was telling me about, where Kyrie Irving was struggling and, hadn't really played that well. And Boeheim turned to Kay and said, I think we should give it to Kyrie. And he said, all right, listening to you, Jim, go ahead, Kyrie, hop in. And so I think that people do value it down here. Probably not as much because you do have the other rivals that are a little more pressing, North Carolina and Virginia, but people definitely still appreciate it and still respect it. And they get up for that game. Let me put it that way.
Well, first of all, breaking news, the Brooklyn Nets have hired Jim Boeheim. If he's the one who can fix, whatever's going on, that's fantastic. But, the USA Basketball, the long friendship, this game is about much more than a result. But do you think beating each other still means a lot to these guys, even though they're friends?
I think that they hate playing each other because I don't think they want to beat each other. Like, I think they're such good friends that like, they don't want okay, especially in the case, just take this season, for example, like Syracuse is probably not going to the NCAA tournament. But there's still a chance that they can keep getting better. There's a chance they can finish better than 500. Obviously, that's been a streak for Boeheim. Kid doesn't want to, go ahead and screw up his record or make him look worse than he has to. Like, like you said, the first game was a 20-point outing and 20-point margin, and that probably didn't accurately describe the way the game went. It was worse. So I think they hate playing each other. I don't think, obviously they want to win. Obviously they want to beat each other, but I think just like playing each other and having to can you imagine if you were playing against one of your best friends and you like destroyed him by 20? Like, that's an awkward scenario afterwards. Like, what do you say? Like, hey, good game. Like, clearly it wasn't, especially knowing how honest both those guys are. Like, I would not at all be surprised if after that first game, Boeheim turned to Kay and was like, well, you kicked our butts. And Kay's like, yep, sure did. And that's sort of matter of fact nature of it.
So we talked about K and Scheyer, but a hot topic up here in Syracuse has been when Coach Boeheim is going to call it quits. And he continues to say that he will not, despite the struggles this season. And we talked about how close these two guys are. How much of an effect do you think Coach K's decision to name a successor and announce he's going to retire after a certain season will affect Boeheim's decision, whether or not he does what Roy Williams did and just walk away, or if he'll do it in advance?
Yeah, it's a great question, because obviously Syracuse sort of was in that position before, right? And it ended up not panning out. But I think when you look at the way that Duke has structured this departure, I think it's something that Boeheim and frankly, there's not many coaches at that stratosphere where those two are at, but anyone who's close, I think they're looking at what Kay is doing here and they're going, this works. This looks good. There's continuity there. And, especially for someone like Jim Boeheim, like he is Syracuse. He has built the program. He has made it what it is. The most, I would imagine, difficult thing for him stepping away is the fear that it's not going to be there anymore, is the fear that you're going to walk away and it'll crumble. And the foundation you will have built actually wasn't a foundation at all. So I think that in helping to name a successor, a coach in waiting, you do two things. One, you establish continuity for the program. You let someone else be in the building for a year, 2 years, whatever, and see how things work. And then hopefully they carry the things that work and they see the things that maybe don't. Coach Boeheim's in his 70s. Like, this is a guy who is not up to date on everything that's going on in college basketball anymore. Same as Kay. And John Shire is, and a coach in waiting, a successor for Boeheim would be the same way. The other thing I think that you look at it for is it gives that coach control while also helping to gradually phase them out. One of the reasons I think it's been hard for Coach Boeheim to step away is, what does he do when he's gone? What is he going to do? How is he going to spend his days? Like, can he fathom not being a head basketball coach anymore? And having that process in place, I think it has helped Coach K to distance himself a little bit. He's been able to say to John Shire, like, look, this is how I handled this. Next time I want you to handle it. And, Kay's big thing is empowering his people beneath him so that they don't just feel like they're like picking up his scraps, like they're just delegators. They feel like they have ownership of these tasks he's giving them. And I think it's something that Coach Boeheim could learn from. And if he's not considering it, I certainly think he should be.
I mean, and you've seen both sides of it firsthand reporting on UNC as well. And while North Carolina has actually, I think, turned in a decent year, they've had some bumpy, times, and perhaps it's, the big rush of a new coach coming in. I do want to move the focus a little bit back to the actual game on the floor now, because at least for Duke, who will obviously make the tournament, this game still matters. A month ago, it felt like the pressure defense of Duke had such a big effect on Buddy Boeheim and Joe Girard. How do you see a pressure defense playing out again?
Yeah, it's sort of a similar deal. And I think it's a bad matchup for Syracuse because Duke has two incredible perimeter defenders in Wendell Moore Jr. and Trevor Keels. Those are both potential first-round draft picks. And, Keels is one of the best defenders in the ACC. And Wendell Moore Jr. at times has been even better than he has. The press, I think, Syracuse's offense, even before some of the injuries, even before the adjusted lineups, if you want to call them, it was not an offense where like every single player on the roster could score. There's not scores at every position like there are for Duke. And so if you can really hamper down and highlight on those guys, whether it be via press, making them tired, doubling, whatever, that's exactly what K is going to attack. So I think that, again, you're talking about two elite perimeter defenders, who are going to make life miserable for Buddy and for Joe Girard. And, I don't mean to be rude, but let's face it, athletically, those guys have a massive advantage over Buddy and Joe Girard. They just do. Those are better athletes. So I think that physicality, that athleticism advantage, I would go so far, especially in the case of Joe Girard, to say a conditioning advantage. Those things come into play, especially this late in the season. And Duke has a deeper bench. It can cycle through guys a little bit more. Like, at the top of the scouting report, those are the two guys, and Duke's going to do everything it can to take them away.
Well, the struggles certainly showed up for Joe on Wednesday against Notre Dame. It was not his finest output. But moving over to the Duke offense, in this last game that they played against Syracuse, they had 4 of their starters had 15 points. Is that something they can replicate with such an even distribution, or is someone going to have to step up and go, maybe 20 plus?
No, I think it's a similar sort of deal. So, going back and looking at that, I think you saw AJ Griffin obviously started to emerge there, hit 5 threes. Paolo Banchero even being able to knock down a three. He's a zone breaker, right? Like he is, if you were drawing up someone who could break a zone, like he is sort of that creative player. Because if he gets the ball at the high post there, that's where he wants to shoot from. Like that's his favorite spot. So if you're locking him in there, like great, that's what he wants. But at the same time, he has the physicality and the size and the speed to get by you if he needs. But no, and frankly, this Duke team hasn't been as lopsided scoring wise, I would say recently. Last night, Jeremy Roach against Virginia led them in scoring. Over the last 7 games, Paolo Banchero has only been averaging 13 points a game. Over the first 7 games in ACC play, he was averaging 20 points. It's all the way down to 13. I mean, he's hitting a freshman wall of sorts, and AJ Griffin has come up and Trevor Keels comes up. I mean, all of these guys are capable of doing similar things. And like I mentioned before, the first game was sort of a clinic in terms of passing for Duke and sharing the ball and getting open looks. I think that's a similar thing. I just don't know that Syracuse has the athletes in the zone to be able to combat Duke's ball movement when it's at its best.
It was pretty ridiculous. Like I remember at the half, Boncaro hadn't scored a ton of points. I don't remember exactly, but that was almost the scariest thing, is that they were killing them, and it really didn't even feel like Paulo was playing that well. He did have a bunch of assists and rebounds in that game, but it ends up being a big win for Duke. Now coming into this game, for Duke, just a can't lose. For Syracuse, obviously the tournament's probably out of the question, but it's a big game for the Orange every year, probably the largest on-campus crowd of the season, the Boeheim K atmosphere. With all that going on, is there one matchup, maybe one phase of the game, something that you point out as the determining factor?
Ooh, that's tough. I do think that, I'll say this, Duke was great in terms of passing the ball in that first game, great at getting open 3-point looks. Duke is not a dominant 3-point shooting team. There are nights when this team goes 1 of 15, 3 of 18 from 3. And on nights like that, especially when it is struggling to finish around the rim, as it did against Virginia, Paolo, I think, was 2 of 13 against the Cavaliers, really, really struggled finishing at the rim through contact. And like, that's his best attribute. So I think that if the shots are not falling, then I do think this will be a closer game than the last time. And oftentimes in games where Duke has had those big leads and they've disappeared, it has been because its shot selection stops being elite and it stops knocking those down. I think that if they stay true and dedicated to, picking apart the zone, if they're willing to camp Paolo out there and cut off of him and rotate around him and make those extra hockey passes, I think the opportunity still exists for a similar outcome. But certainly if the shot selection is not what it needs to be, I think that's a case where maybe the offense, I still think that defensively, it's going to be a really tough outing for Buddy Boeheim and Joe Girard to get their points against this Duke defense. But I think that there is a chance that the zone can limit Duke's offense enough to keep it closer than it was the last time. But again, there's a reason that this team is trending to be a top 2 seed and that Syracuse isn't in the tournament. And I would expect again that talent discrepancy is gonna be on full display.
So that's the big question. Do you see the trend continuing? Is Duke going to knock down shots and demolish the Orange? Once again, what's your prediction for the game?
I would say probably so. And I also think this, like you can't discount the fact that this is a Duke team that is now going to have had a couple of days off. They have been in a couple of stretches lately where it's been, 4 games in 8 days, 5 games in 9 days. And now they get a full day off and then they get another day off. It is a travel up there, obviously, but they're going to be a little bit more rested. Even on the road, I just don't know that the environment in and of itself is going to be enough. And, the zone is what it is. And when it works great, it works great. But there's a lack of flexibility there that this Duke team, again, it's a bad matchup. This Duke team can beat you in 4 or 5 different ways. Picking apart the zone is just one of those ways. So I'm going to pick Duke. Do you guys know what the spread is in this game?
I don't believe
it's out yet. Okay. I would imagine, if I had to guess,
this Thursday for the listener or viewer. So I don't think it's out at this point.
Yeah. I would imagine it's going to be at least in the 10, it'll be a double-digit spread. And I would not be ashamed of taking that spread if I were a gambling man.
All right, Brendan, I'm going to steal one question here before we go, because it's pretty rare that we would get the combo of a Duke UNC reporter with Syracuse playing Duke and then UNC in back-to-back games. So the Orange obviously at a big disadvantage to Mark Williams with the fact that Jesse Edwards is out. Is there any prayer for Syracuse against a North Carolina team that frankly usually manhandles them on the glass anyway without Edwards in there?
I actually think there is. I think there's probably more of a chance against North Carolina than there is against Duke. Obviously, there's not as much talent in North Carolina, but North Carolina is tired. This is an exhausted team. Hubert Davis is playing his starters on average 30 plus minutes a night. They're getting at times single digit or no points from their bench. So when those starters go out, like he is not putting in reserves for them to try and expand a lead, try to close a gap. He's putting them in to catch a breather for the starters to go back in. Like the reserves are not out there to like make plays. They're out there to buy time. So I do think that is catching up to North Carolina. You saw it catch up to them on Monday against Louisville. Struggle. That's not a good basketball team. And UNC really struggled to put them away until late. UNC has played, crazy as it sounds, has played better on the road than it has at home lately. So, being at home, they tend to get a little complacent. I think there's a chance that's a decent game. I really do. Even with Armando Bacot, obviously that's a huge size advantage, but I have a weird sinking feeling that maybe this doesn't go the way it needs to for North Carolina. And that's a game that the Tar Heels can't afford to lose. They are squarely on the tournament bubble. Losing at home to Syracuse, crazy as it sounds, bad loss. That's not a loss that this team can afford right now.
Syracuse with 2 shots to play. Spoiler, Brendan, thanks so much for giving us everything we needed on Duke and a sprinkle of UNC as well.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys, and I hope they're good games.